Welcome back to the Brittany Hughes Show, everybody. Today in the world of it turns out that when you keep schools closed for the better part of 1 to 2 years, students' academic success goes down the proverbial toilet. We all knew, those of us who were paying attention, those of us with children, those of us who were watching what the government was doing to students during the so-called COVID pandemic, knew that keeping classrooms closed, knew that long-term remote learning, knew that making students sit at home, oftentimes unsupervised, while their parents were trying to work in another room or work outside the home, was going to destroy academic careers. It did not take a rocket scientist to predict how that was going to go down. It does not take, too much forethought to understand that when you take millions of young children and you keep them out of schools and you keep them away from teachers and you plunk them down in front of a screen, that's probably going to cause a problem when it comes to their grades, when it comes to their ability to learn and absorb information. We already had an education problem in this country. Now we are figuring out just how bad the problem is now that schools are reopening. And we're now headed into the 2022-23 academic school year, which is in full swing, and we are figuring out just how bad students have lagged behind academically thanks not to COVID. A virus did not do this. COVID did not do this. We as a society did this to our children. The government's response to COVID, in large part to damage the re-election chances of a president that they did not like. That is what has landed us in the position that we are in. New studies are now emerging showing just how far students are academically behind thanks to school closures, and it is not good news, not for the immediate future, not for the foreseeable future. I find it funny that liberals and some in the leftist media are finally starting to notice this damage that was done and finally starting to talk about it, largely I think because it is an unavoidable problem, right? This has now become the elephant in the room so big that it's crowding out everything else because parents are starting to realize, holy crap, my 8th grader is reading at a 5th grade level. This is a problem. What the heck is going on? Teachers are starting to scream it from the rafters. We have a problem here. We have students in the 3rd grade that are having trouble writing their own names and reading short one-syllable words. We are having a problem here. And it's starting to become so unavoidable that even people in the leftist media who spent months, if not the better part of 2 years under the so-called COVID pandemic, hailing the government's response to it, hailing all of the school closures and the business closures and all of the shutdowns that were foisted upon us in the name of keeping everybody safe and giving carte blanche to leftists to scream that the rest of us were grandma killers if we pointed out that maybe this wasn't the way to go. Maybe we're going to have a problem moving forward if we shut down classrooms. Maybe some things can kill people even more quickly than a virus. Maybe we've got a long-term problem here. Now, all of a sudden, some of these same liberals who are perfectly fine shilling for heavy-handed dictatorial government shutdowns back then are now saying, holy crap, maybe we need to talk about this whole school issue. Jake Tapper, for example, over on CNN, bewildered that there's been no national discussion about the impact of COVID closures on kids. Check this out.
I have to say, I'm surprised that there hasn't been a national conversation about the damage done to kids because of these school closures and the virtual learning and everything. Because, I mean, I'm not saying there should be a national do-over, but we can't just pretend that 5th graders who are now 7th graders that didn't happen, you know? Like, I feel like there should be, and not with a blame game. Look, it happened. People did it. It was criticized, the school closures, the virtual learning, et cetera. But here we are. There needs to be like a bipartisan movement, you know?
He says he's not arguing for a national reset. There is no national do-over. Even if we wanted one, the damage is done. That's the point. And that's the point that some of us were screaming at the beginning when classrooms were closed and then they stayed closed and 15 days to slow the spread. that started out as kind of a pajama party snow day turned into, well, now we're just not going to reopen for several months. Now we're not going to reopen at the start of next year. Now we've got kids that have gone the better part of 2 years on and off with remote learning in some areas. Okay, we were screaming this from the beginning. There is no opportunity for a national do-over. There is no opportunity to hit the reset button and go back and fix all of this. The damage has been done. How bad is the damage? Well, check this out. The National Assessment of Education Progress. This is known as the nation's report card, right? So this is a comprehensive test that is given to a sampling of students from all 50 states every 2 years between January and March. This is the first time that it's been given since 2019, okay? So this latest test is seen as a referendum on COVID shutdowns' impact on children and academic learning in K through 12 grades. The National Assessment of Education Process tested hundreds of thousands of 4th and 8th graders across the country this year and found, not shockingly to those of us who have been paying attention, math scores plummeted by the largest margins in the history of the program, largely thanks to COVID shutdowns and remote learning that shoved a bunch of kids into their bedrooms in front of a screen and expected that to be good enough so that paranoid adults could feel better and get their snow day. Math scores were worst among 8th graders, with 38% earning scores deemed below basic. Are you understanding this? 38% of 8th graders received math scores deemed below basic. That doesn't just mean below where we want them to be. That means below the minimum that we think they should have achieved. In 2022, the average 4th grade mathematics score decreased by 5 points and was lower than all previous assessment years going back to 2005. The average 8th grade mathematics score decreased by 8 points compared to 2019 and was lower than all previous assessment years going back to 2003. So that's 4th grade and 8th grade, both experiencing extreme decreases in mathematics scores. 4th grade mathematics scores declined across all regions of the country and in 43 states and jurisdictions. 4th grade mathematics scores declined in 23 out of 26 participating urban districts. So we're seeing this across the board. The scores decreased for lower, middle, and higher performing 4th graders and across all racial demographics. Okay, so we're talking about kids that probably wouldn't have done all that great to begin with, were not high academic achievers to begin with, all the way up to kids that were high academic achievers. All of them experienced declines in their mathematics scores. White kids, black kids, Hispanic kids, Asian kids. It was across all racial and ethnic demographics. Not surprisingly, however, the decreases were the most prominent among Black and Hispanic students who were statistically more likely to be at risk before the pandemic anyway. Let me sum this up for you. Children who were at risk to begin with, in particular, were directly and disproportionately damaged by COVID shutdowns, pushed largely by the same leftists that like to throw gobs of money at urban areas and claim to care so much about the urban poor and children in cities. And those are the same exact people that devastated one of a child's best chances at getting out of poverty, at getting out of a bad socioeconomic situation, which is academics. And these children will never recover. There are children that have been irreparably damaged by this. Their academic career will never catch up to what it was. No teacher is going to be able to come in and just magically fix this problem for all of the children that are now dealing with this issue. One analysis back in April found that 8th graders in California alone had the academic skill level of 5th graders. Children that are in their last year of middle school, about to go into high school, performing at an elementary school level. This is incredibly problematic. It continues. The ACTs, multiple studies, by the way, multiple studies across the board have come out proving time and time again that the academic achievement among children has just gone totally in the crapper over the past couple of years. College admission tests, the ACTs, are showing the same problem. ACT scores have fallen to the lowest level in 30 years. For the first time since the early 1990s, the average composite score fell below 20. The highest score you can get for an ACT is 36. The test scores show 42% of ACT tested graduates in the class of 2022 met none of the subject benchmarks in English. That's almost half. Met none of the subject benchmarks in English, reading, science, and math, which are all indicators of how well students are expected to do in corresponding college courses. This is a predictor of how well you're going to do. If you do well in the ACTs coming out of high school, this is a predictor of how well you will do in college courses that start there and continue on. And we are seeing extreme declines in students' ability to pass these tests and to achieve even proficient benchmarks across all subjects. This did not need to happen. This was not necessary. And it's interesting because now that parents are starting to realize this, now that teachers are starting to have to grapple with this problem and the education system is struggling to deal with this crisis that we created, the same exact officials that were pushing this in the first place now want to try to pretend like, oh, none of this is our fault. We didn't actually do this. Don't blame us. And they're doing this by now coming out in favor of opening schools and keeping schools open. Like this is some brilliant, bright new idea that they've just now stumbled upon. Randy Weingarten, for example, president of the American Federation of Teachers. She's perhaps best known for, you remember a couple of years ago, when she was pushing hard for all students to remain masked in school. Teachers, kids, children as young as kindergarten and preschool. She wanted to slap masks on their faces, snotty, dirt, germ-ridden, filthy rags on children's faces for hours a day. Meanwhile, she was out partying at restaurants with her buddies, completely barefaced. Do you remember this lady? Height of hypocrisy. It was absolutely shameless. She was one of the foremost pushers of keeping schools closed, of keeping things locked down. Here's where she was in July of 2020, July 21st, 2020. Here's what she tweeted. Demanding schools reopen is reckless and it will not happen without a fight. And fight she did. She fought tooth and nail. And so did the 1.7 million members of her union fought tooth and nail to keep schools closed, supposedly to protect children and adults. And it was complete and total bullcrap. Now she's denying any involvement, saying that she wants to keep schools open, saying that COVID destroyed students' academic careers, and saying that we need to work hard to get them back on track because this was absolutely horrible, and pretending like she wasn't one of the ones creating that problem in the first place. It's the most shameless lie. And we have the receipts. It's not like she's gone back on Twitter and tried to delete anything. She, honest to Pete, thinks that you and I and parents across this country are so stupid as to believe that she had these children's best interests at heart from the get-go. And all of this was done based on lies. Lie after lie after lie. You'll recall that when everybody on the left, everybody in the media, all of these Democrat politicians, all of these liberal officials in school boards and across blue states and blue cities, I mean, absolutely coming down on governors like Ron DeSantis in Florida for daring to reopen things, for daring to let grown adults make their own decisions, for daring to prioritize the health and well-being and academic success of children. You will recall when this big push was being made for keeping everything shut down to the point of calling every single conservative that, dared to question the government line, grandma killers, saying you don't care if people are dying, you've got blood all over your hands. You remember all of that going on? People being assaulted in the streets for not wearing a mask. And all of it was being done on this premise that we need to get this vaccine so that we can get inoculated. And then when the vaccine did come out, there was this push for vaccine mandates across schools, across businesses, all of this based on the idea, based on the claim that was pushed verbatim repeatedly that they want you to forget about now because it's been proven to be complete and totally bogus. Based on the claim that that the COVID vaccine is in fact a vaccine, which technically it's not, that the COVID vaccine prevented you from both contracting and then transmitting COVID. That was the basis for the vaccine push. That was the basis for keeping schools closed. You remember, even after adults could get vaccinated, there was still this bizarre push to keep schools closed. And even when they did open, to keep kids masked up, because God forbid this child that can't get vaccinated because it hadn't been rolled out for their age group yet, infect a teacher that had been vaccinated and so supposedly could not contract COVID. And everybody was sitting there going, what in the world are you talking about? This teacher is vaccinated and can't get COVID or transmit COVID. Then why are they at risk of getting it from this student that can't get vaccinated against COVID? And we were all told, when we pointed out that illogic, just sit down and shut up. We know what's best for you. Everything is fine. Keep your kids masked, and we're going to shut down schools whenever we darn well please. And people like Randy Weingarten were at the forefront of that. Pfizer, good old Pfizer, trust Pfizer, stick your arm out, let them jab you with this needle. Don't ask what's in it. It's fine. They've got your best interests at heart. Everything is fine. They're the experts. Trust them. Pfizer now admits that they never tested the vaccine for efficacy in transmission, meaning that we were all lied to. And this administration knew it. We were told that the vaccine would not only help stop the spread, that not only would it keep people from getting sick, but that it would inoculate everybody, and that COVID would cease to become a thing. We could eradicate it because we could stop its transmission. And that's why we all had to line up like cattle and get our jabs, because not only would it keep us from getting sick and clogging up a bunch of ER beds, it would also keep us from spreading the virus to other people because we then could not get it ourselves. This is what we were told. Now, we've all known that this has been a false claim for a while now. We all know now, and have for a long time, as soon as breakthrough cases started popping up left, right, and sideways, and everybody goes, oh, holy crap, this isn't actually keeping anybody from getting anything. And breakthrough cases became more and more common, and suddenly they weren't breakthrough cases anymore. Suddenly they were just run-of-the-mill, yeah, you got your jab, but you also got COVID. And people started getting the jab and the booster, and then they were still getting COVID 2, 3, 4 times. And everybody figured out that the idea of the vaccine stopping transmission was bullcrap. Not only do we know that now we know that Pfizer never even tested this vaccine as to whether or not it would stop transmission. Janine Small, president of international markets at Pfizer, told the European Parliament on Monday that Pfizer never tested its COVID vaccine for preventing the transmission of this virus before it entered the market in December of 2020. Check this out.
There are no misunderstandings. Was the Pfizer COVID vaccine tested on stopping the transmission of the virus before it entered the market? If not, please say it clearly. If yes, are you willing to share the data with this committee? And I really want a straight answer, yes or no, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Regarding the question around, did we know about stopping immunisation before it's entered the market? No.
Okay, but that's the problem. Because that's the claim that was made. That's the claim that was peddled. This is the lie that was told to us. If Pfizer never tested the vaccine for efficacy in transmission prevention, that should have been made clear from the get-go, but it wasn't, because it wasn't expedient to the narrative. Nobody was going to line up and stick out their arms for an experimental shot if it wasn't going to prevent them from contracting the virus that they were trying to protect themselves against. That would not have worked. And it certainly would not have paved the way for the government to come in and start mandating a vaccine that didn't actually stop you from getting and transmitting the virus. There is no way that that would have flown. They needed some line to convince people that if you get this, you are 100% protected, and that's why we have to mandate that everybody get it. Because we're doing this for your health, in your best interests, and to make sure that you're protecting grandma. Because without us, you would kill grandma and probably not even feel bad about it. That's the line that was peddled. And this is what created the basis for vaccine mandates, for places like New York City to mandate vaccine passports, to go out basically in public and show your face. Do you remember videos coming out of New York City of moms and their children getting kicked out of pizza parlors because they didn't have a card showing that they had gotten the jab that wasn't going to protect them from the virus anyway, but couldn't say that back then? And this is the same line that helped form the basis for the argument to keep kids out of schools. Well, kids can't get vaccinated, so they can't get inoculated, so we have to keep schools closed, and even when we reopen them, we've got to slap masks on them and make sure that they can't understand each other and they can't interact, make sure that they have to sit 15 feet apart from each other in 27-degree weather in a rainstorm out on some picnic tables. Don't let them talk to each other. Don't let them socialize, but they're going to be fine. They're going to be fine because you know what? Kids are resilient. Kids are resilient. Kids can make it through anything. No. Kids are not resilient. Kids are inherently fragile. That's why we as adults have a responsibility to protect them and to defend them and to make decisions that are in their best interests. And the idea that kids are resilient and that they can take anything we throw at them and that we can do whatever we want, whenever we want, and they're going to make it through is a lie. It's a lie that we adults tell ourselves to make selfish decisions that we want while ignoring the detrimental effects that it has on children. It's the same thing that we tell ourselves when families get broken up. It's the same thing we tell ourselves when making the argument that a child doesn't actually need their biological mother. It's perfectly fine for two dudes to just engineer a child, and that child grows up never knowing the woman that actually gave birth to them. Children are resilient. They don't actually need this. And it's the same argument that was made for keeping them out of schools, for mandating that they don't socialize with one another, for mandating that they keep a filthy, dirty, germ-ridden rag on their face for hours. Same argument. The vaccine is necessary to stop transmission, and it was a lie. And Pfizer knew that that claim was being put out there as fact, despite the fact that they had never tested this vaccine against transmission. But now the media wants to pretend that this is not news. The media wants us to believe that we simply assumed that the vaccine would stop transmission. But it wasn't Pfizer's fault because Pfizer never actually claimed that it would stop transmission. Factcheck.org, which is supposed to be one of the gurus of truth. It's used by places like Fakebook to censor places like MRC-TV. Factcheck.org posted this. It's not news nor scandalous that Pfizer trial didn't test transmission. It's not news or scandalous? It's not news or scandalous that a company that was rolling out its vaccine to the market knew that claims were being made about its vaccine that had not been proven to be true. That's not scandalous. It's not scandalous that those claims made up the basis of vaccine mandates for this shot that hadn't even been tested for transmission efficacy. That's not scandalous. That's the height of scandal. But the leftist media doesn't want you to know that. The leftist media doesn't want you to know that because it completely destroys their narrative and it leaves them with egg all over their faces. The AP, Janine Small, president of international markets at Pfizer, told the European Parliament on Monday that Pfizer didn't know whether its COVID-19 vaccine prevented transmission of the virus before it entered the market in December of 2020, but Pfizer never claimed to have studied the issue before the vaccine's market release. So we're actually to buy the line that it's totally our fault for assuming that the vaccine would prevent transmission because the company never actually said it. Even though this was the line that was peddled by Dr. Deborah Birx, by Dr. Anthony Fauci. This was the line that was peddled by Rochelle Walensky, by the Biden administration, repeatedly. And what's interesting is when I first heard this week, it set off some bells in my head because I knew I had heard something along this line before. So I went back digging through things that I had written when the COVID vaccine was being rolled out, and there was some confusion over breakout cases and why isn't this actually doing what we were all told that it would do, and all of the stories and all of the videos that us at MRC-TV were rolling out, trying to keep up with the latest claims and trying to make sure that truth was being exposed in a sea of lies. All of these articles and all of these videos were getting taken off of YouTube and censored and flagged by Facebook. We were getting red flagged all over the place, and our reach was getting absolutely destroyed across social media because we were reporting things like this. Here is Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla saying in March of 2021, and I cited in one of my blogs that got red flagged on Facebook, that a study had found that his vaccine was 100% effective in protecting against infections in children ages 12 through 15. Not protecting against serious illness, not protecting against hospitalizations and deaths, in protecting against infections. Here is the CNBC article verbatim. Pfizer said its coronavirus vaccine was 100% effective in preventing COVID-19 in children ages 12 to 15, not preventing sickness, not preventing severe illness and death, in preventing COVID-19. CNBC continued, the trial enrolled 2,260 participants in the United States. There were 18 confirmed COVID-19 infections observed in the placebo group and no confirmed infections in the group that received the vaccine, the company said. That resulted in a vaccine efficacy of 100%. It said, again, they weren't testing for serious illness. They were testing for what they considered to be vaccine efficacy, which they defined as no confirmed infections. 100% vaccine efficacy. This is the same company that now wants you to believe that it never claimed that their vaccine would stop transmission. That is, in fact, exactly what they were claiming. And Bourla used this study, cited right here, to push for inoculating children ages 12 to 15 at the time with his vaccine. CNBC continued, children make up around 20% of the U.S. population, according to government data. Between 70 and 85% of the U.S. population needs to be vaccinated against COVID to achieve herd immunity. Immunity means you don't get the virus. Immunity does not mean that you don't get sick or experience symptoms. It does not mean that your illness is light rather than getting hospitalized with it. It does not mean simply that you won't die. Immunity means you will not get this virus. And that was what Pfizer was claiming in March of 2021. And what's hilarious, not funny, is that the Biden administration is continuing to peddle this lie, even though we're simultaneously being told that they never told the lie in the first place, and it's our stupid fault for making assumptions and believing something that we were never actually given as fact in the first place. So first of all, here's Biden this week, who can barely tie his own shoes. This is a man that stumbles around bumping into walls like, a dude in a blow-up sumo wrestler costume. He can barely find his way off stage. He has to have his handlers tell him where he's at any given time. He wished Kamala Harris a happy birthday to a great president earlier this week. This is a man that has absolutely no idea who he is, where he is, or what job he's got. So maybe we can forgive him a little bit for this, considering the fact that, his story about his own childhood changes from minute to minute. 1 minute, he grew up in Delaware, and the next minute he grew up in Puerto Rico. We have absolutely no idea. But here's Biden saying this week that we're facing a global health emergency about 3 weeks after telling 60 Minutes that the pandemic is completely over. Here he is.
Some of our friends in Congress say we don't need COVID funding, or they say there's really no reason that the government should be paying for it. I strongly disagree. Strongly disagree. This is a global health emergency. If we really want to put COVID behind us, we have to keep up the fight together.
Okay, now you'll recall just a few weeks ago, he told 60 Minutes that the pandemic is completely over.
Mr. President, first Detroit auto show in 3 years.
Yeah.
Is the pandemic over?
The pandemic is over. We still have a problem with COVID. We're still doing a lot of work on it. But the pandemic is over. If you notice, no one's wearing masks. Everybody seems to be in pretty good shape. And so I think it's changing, and I think this is a perfect example of it.
Huh? So the pandemic is over, but we've still got a global health emergency. COVID is done for and everything's perfectly fine and we should all go about our lives, but also COVID is such a detrimental hardship right now. COVID is an immediate emergent problem that we need to get Congress to chuck billions more dollars at it. We need to make sure that everybody lines up for their 18th booster because God forbid you don't get that. And the amazing thing is that here's Biden once again suggesting, after we all know this is complete bunk, that if you get your 17th dose of the booster on top of the 2 original doses that you were supposed to get in the first place, if you just keep getting these shots ad nauseum forever and ever, amen, for the rest of your life, all hail, then you are protecting other people.
One COVID shot each year will be all they need. And if you get it, you're protected. And if you don't, you're putting yourself and other people on unnecessary risk.
That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. We've established at this point that the only thing that you are doing at best, is maybe protecting yourself against serious illness and death. And mostly that if you are an older person or someone with at least a couple of comorbidities to go along with this. If you're a generally young, healthy person, COVID is a lot less deadly to you. It is a lot less of a threat to you. That has been established from the get-go. At best, if you are an overweight person, if you are an older person, if you're Lizzo, maybe the vaccine will help keep you from getting seriously ill. But we have established long ago that it does jack diddly to help you protect other people because it doesn't stop you from getting the dumb thing and it doesn't stop you from giving it to grandma at the Thanksgiving table. As a matter of fact, what it might do is heighten the likelihood that you give it to grandma because if it suppresses your symptoms, you could have COVID and not even know it. We know now that that's the truth. So even while we're being told, you were never actually told that the vaccine stops transmission. Pfizer never actually said that. Here's Biden still saying that. Here's the administration, here's the White House, here's the President of the United States still pushing that lie. Where are the fact checkers? This man is standing at the bully pulpit, continuing to spread a debunked myth, and nobody's saying a word about it. It's almost as if some on the left have pushed this lie for so long, they almost don't know how to stop peddling it, even though it's not true. Of course, this is the same exact Biden administration that's now claiming that they actually wanted to reopen schools early on in the pandemic. We never actually wanted to keep schools closed. Here's Biden's COVID coordinator, Ashish Jha, saying that he was advocating early on that schools reopen because it is so incredibly important that students get an in-person education.
I think there are many of us in the public health community who are arguing for in-person education as safe, doable, really useful for children. There is not one single view, but I think there is no question about it. Many of us believed from relatively early in the pandemic that it was really important for kids to have in-person education and advocated for it. Obviously, I was advocating as an outside, as an academic expert.
But here he is back in July of 2020 advocating for the exact opposite because the internet is forever.
Dr. Ashish Jha, director of the Harvard Global Health Institute. Dr. Jha, thank you so much for coming on. Let's just break down what we heard today from administration officials. The White House says schools must reopen, but then Dr. Birx said some areas should roll back to phase 1 because of a coronavirus resurgence. What are parents, especially those in COVID hotspots right now, supposed to think?
Yeah, so thank you for having me on. What we're hearing from Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci is the truth, the scientific basic facts. And those are that in those hotspots, you can't afford to have indoor gatherings of 10 or more. That was what Dr. Birx said. Hard to imagine running a school where you can't have more than 10 people inside of a building. So the reality is that as long as those hotspots remain, it's going to be very, very hard to open schools and keep them open. Now, as a parent of 3 kids, I find the idea that the kids don't go back to school to be awful. But here we are, and we're just not taking the virus seriously.
Same guy. Randy Weingarten. We never really wanted to close schools. We tried to open schools as quickly as we could. We know that students need an in-person learning, and look at the damage that's been done, and oh my gosh, this is absolutely so awful. You were the one pushing for it, you vapid haint. You were the one that created this problem. And the problem here now is that this isn't just an immediate issue. This is going to be a problem that echoes across this generation. This test that determined that academic success has drastically dropped, this test was performed across 4th and 8th graders sort of as a benchmark study. But children across every single grade level were detrimentally affected by the government's extreme, dictatorial COVID response against a virus with a 99% survivability rate and with a vaccine that we were all told would stop transmission, and now we're being told that was never the case, and we didn't ever say so. And this is supposed to make millions of American parents feel better about the fact that their child is now years behind where they should be academically and will likely never catch up. This is not only going to be a problem across the board for all children, this is going to be extremely problematic for children that were at risk to begin with, that have been shoved into failing urban schools in blue cities where they barely had a snowball's chance in hell of succeeding anyway. We're going to see this across children that should have gotten specialized help early on, children with speech therapy issues that were needing addressed. We're going to see this echo throughout this generation, and it will never, ever get any better for those kids. The damage is done. When Jake Tapper sits there and says, oh, well, I'm not advocating for a national do-over. There is no national do-over. There's no reset button. There's no video game here that we can just maybe go back and try a different tactic. The damage is done. And it was pushed on the basis of a lie. It was pushed on the basis of a lie peddled by the Biden administration once they got into office, but that was begun by power-hungry leftists who were staring down the barrel of a 2020 presidential election and wanted to ruin the re-election chances of a Republican president that they could not stand. And they wanted to do everything they could to get him out of office. And they were willing to sacrifice the futures of hundreds of thousands of children, just like they were willing to sacrifice small business owners, just like they were willing to sacrifice landlords. They were willing to sacrifice the backbone of this country and the future of this country to get Orange Man out of the Oval. And now the bill has come due. Now the bill has come due. Parents are starting to look at the academic careers of their own children and saying, what the crap have we done? And the idiots who were put in charge, who peddled this nonsense, have nothing. They've got nothing. They've got no solutions. They've got no good explanation. And so now they're backpedaling and trying to make it sound like you and I just made assumptions that they never actually claimed, and that they were doing everything right in the first place, and it was us and our dumb, foolish selves for getting it wrong. Lie after lie after lie. And this one, the problem with this one is that millions of American parents are seeing straight through it. Millions of American parents are now having to deal with the ramifications of what was done to this country, to their families. And we're going to be dealing with it for generations to come. With that, that's the Brittany Hughes Show. I will see you guys back here next Thursday. Make sure you head over to iTunes and hit the subscribe button on the Brittany Hughes Show. That way you can follow the show. Make sure you never miss an episode. You can check out full episodes, of course, as always, on Facebook. You can check out snippets of it on Instagram. We're also on YouTube and Rumble. Also, make sure that you head over to the Newsbusters podcast, where my buddy Tim Graham does a fantastic job every single week of breaking down media bias. That's on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I'll see you guys back here next Thursday. Have a blessed weekend.